Right, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the start of the 2024 NFL season. MDS is back. We are so pumped. We are so excited. We were talking about this for the last couple of weeks, trying to figure out the right time to do the first episode. We're all juggling different travel schedules and whatnot, but alas, here we are back and excited for another rendition of the NFL season. So let's get back into the prompt that we're going to go over today. So it's been a lot of buzz in NFL camps. We're about 2 weeks away from the start of the NFL regular season. And so we thought it would be a good opportunity to talk about the largest breakout players or just the most interesting players in camp right now before the season starts across the entire NFL. I'm really excited about this. We'll also get into the fantasy football segment a little bit later. I will tell you guys, I actually had my moment where I got extremely excited for the NFL. I was walking out of church the other day and I realized that like 7 feet away from me was Adam Thielen and his wife just like hanging out. And he looks NFL ready, man. I don't know how good the Panthers are going to be, but like that man looks NFL ready. He's in shape. And I guess you can say that for any player that wants to make a roster spot right now. So before we start with this prompt, the three top breakout players from training camp before the NFL season starts. Ev, Si, I'll turn it over to you guys. See if you guys have anything to chime in, let the fans know of any upcoming events or activities before we jump into the prompt.
Alrighty.
No, I love the prompt. The thing I'll add is I think we might tilt it to a fantasy football lens. I think the next episode we'll do our full NFL season preview. So I know Si and I are in kind of dynasty mode now, pushing towards redraft mode. So, the next 2 weeks will be swamped, I'm sure, for all of us with fantasy football drafts. So that's on the brain. But so looking forward to the prompt and kicking off this season.
Yeah, all right. I think the idea is to divvy it up. So we're going to go a little bit with the breakouts initially, and then we're going to then go into some sleepers and bounce back players and busts we have specifically the fantasy segment. So it'll be a nice way to break it up and kind of view what you want to view. I also just want to say I'm just excited to talk specifically NFL again. I know we have our intro, but it's just nice being able to yap the way we used to. So let's get it going, Zach. You can tee us up. Your subject. Let's do it.
All right, fellas, let's do it. So the rumblings out of camp that I've heard have been out of the New York Giants camp. Oh. And I am seeing Kayvon Thibodeau and Isaiah Simmons, just absolute freak athletes, having an incredible camp. Both of them are under the age of 26. They're still young guys with plenty of years left. Thibodeau was it seems like a rookie, a year or two ago. But these guys are studs, not only because they're crushing it in camp based on localized reports I've heard out of the New York Giants training camp, but it's because of the acquisition of Brian Burns. And I think Brian Burns and Dexter Lawrence are going to wreak so much havoc in the pass rushing game that it's going to open up clear-cut opportunities for Kayvon Thibodeau. So Kayvon Thibodeau was, his rookie year, he had I think it was 6 sacks, a couple tackles for a loss, finished 4th in Defensive Player of the Year voting. But the next year, he took such a stride forward. He played all 17 games, had 10-plus sacks, 10-plus tackles for a loss. Now he's coming into his 3rd year. They go ahead and get a league veteran in Brian Burns, who he can learn from, participate. Iron sharpens iron. Kayvon Thibodeau, I think, is in store for a monster year. Also, not to mention the fact that they can't double team, right? I know that Brian Burns and Kayvon will be on different sides of the line. They do play a 3-4, so I think Thibodeau will come out of that outside linebacker role. But regardless, I think that there won't be an opportunity to double team him like what happened last year many, many times, because he's just one of the best, most respected players on that defensive front. So that's Thibodeau. I'm also hearing, and I quote, a freak of nature by his own players in Isaiah Simmons, who they are turning into a nickel corner / safety. He's training with the safeties right now. This man is 6'4", 240, and he's a physical specimen. I feel like Arizona didn't know how to use him because he's too talented, didn't fit their defensive scheme. But I think that once Isaiah Simmons is in that particular role where he can still cover that slot to a certain degree, he can jump in, play nickel on those 3rd down and longs. That guy is scary. And if you mentioned, like, if he plays in the flat right now, like if he's like that nickel guy in a zone, like, 2, 4, whatever it might be, and he plays that flat coverage, that's a pick six easy, or he's going to light somebody up because the pass rush is going to get to that opposing team quarterback. We're talking the NFC East quarterbacks. They better be very, very scared because a rush with Lawrence, Burns, and Thibodeau, and then you've got, a quick dump out to a flat or a check down. You got Isaiah Simmons right there at about to lay a massive hit. I think that those two guys are going to be a massive problem in the NFL this year. So those are my, I guess it's like my 1A and my 1B, but I'll pass it over to Evan and we'll continue this thing forward.
I got a quick tidbit before Evan jumps in. Isaiah Simmons, former Clemson player, Dexter Lawrence, former Clemson player, as a game clock, I knew them well. Isaiah specifically, his speed is so underrated for a guy his
Mm-hmm.
size, and that's such a good point. And the other thing is, he should be free roaming, and I think that's probably something that Arizona may have mishandled. I can't speak to their exact scheming, but I think just in general, like it felt like he was trying to be one track minded a little bit too much. So him free roaming is a beautiful thing, and I think that's really going to pay dividends. So that's a really good point, Zach. And I think people aren't focusing a lot on their defense, and that's an awesome point. The other thing I will say is Zach in our intro made a point of stating that he is not a Panthers fan. He is a Falcons fan. And, I believe you, but
Right.
he managed to bring up Brian Burns, ex-Panther, because he's in love with Panthers players. So, of course, Brian Burns is the reason that all these guys are going to be good, as he just stated. I just want to point that out. Anyway, continue. Go ahead.
Yeah, the my reaction to Zach's point is I want to point out my favorite thing about Zach and Zach being a part of this podcast is that he'll always go to the defensive side of the ball for these types of prompts, which I think is awesome because, I mean, I'm most guilty of this by far and just like focusing on the skill positions and the quarterbacks and these types of prompts. But I love how Zach goes to the defensive side of the ball and sometimes even in the trenches, man. That's good stuff. That's a good mention. I mean, that
football, baby.
Yeah, that Burns acquisition is really scary. It might turn out to be somewhat irrelevant with how limited the Giants' offense is going to be, but and with how much nickel is played in the NFL now, like that safety hybrid that can jump down in the box depending on what the offense brings out there is so huge. So that's a good mention. But so mine, I'm not necessarily going to guarantee he's a breakout. So I'm taking this one as perhaps the player I'm most interested in. So maybe the most interesting player based on what happened in camp and more so the offseason. And I'm going to go to one of the NFC favorites in the Detroit Lions, and I'm going to go to Jameson Williams. And the reason I say this is because the Detroit Lions let Josh Reynolds walk, and they basically brought no one else in for that wide receiver 2 spot. And that Josh Reynolds role was so huge. He didn't get a ton of receptions, but it was also so huge in the run game because he was an elite run blocker. And you look at their offense now, with obviously you have the 2 backs, Montgomery pounding it up the middle and Gibbs with the more explosiveness. You have Amon-Ra St. Brown and Laporte who are going to soak up targets. But you need that one other big play guy that can really step up. And Jameson, he's been pretty up and down in camp from what I understand. But Dan Campbell has basically said in press conference that he's desperate for someone to step up at the wide receiver 2 spot. And if I look at the roster, the only guy that can possibly do it is him. And from a fantasy perspective, we were in dynasty mode and people were drafting, all these new rookie wide receivers, Keon Coleman, Ricky Pearsall, all these kind of guys ahead of Jameson Williams. And people forget that Jameson Williams was a way higher draft pick in a way more loaded receiver class. And if it wasn't for that injury that we already knew about, he could have been even like a top 5 pick. And, he had just way more talent than all of these guys. And he's up and down with the drops and the inconsistency and all that kind of stuff. But if he can just be more consistent and put it all together, that would be so huge for a team that has its sights set on going to the Super Bowl. So
I think that's a great point, and that's a great person to point out. I've always been a Williams guy in the context of talent. I think sometimes when you think of it from a fantasy perspective, especially with Dynasty, I think people's biggest worry is that you got Laporta, you got Gibbs, you got Amon-Ra St. Brown. So the target share is not going to be as much there. However, his ability to take the top off a defense is something that is just going to add a whole nother dynamic to that offense. Coming into camp, I know both his seasons so far, he hasn't started the season with the team, which is a huge, step back, because figuring it out in the middle of the year when you haven't gotten antiquated with the team throughout the course of the season is really difficult to do. For him to come out of camp and start hopefully week 1 I think will be a beautiful thing. And he really only needs 5 targets a game for him to completely change the scope of not just your fantasy team, but the scope of Alliance offense. So I'm super excited about that. Offense is so loaded; it's actually ridiculous. Like we didn't even bring up David Montgomery. It's ridiculous. On that note, I'll jump to another receiver. Zach already mentioned the Giants. I really wanted to talk about Malik Neighbors, but I just feel like that's fairly. It's almost too obvious, right? Because I Malik Neighbors, if it wasn't for Marvin Harrison Jr., would be talking about him as a top 5 pick and one of the most talented receivers to come out in a long time. He's another one of the LSU breed that just comes out and it doesn't matter who's around him, he makes plays. And I don't know what Daniel Jones is going to do, and I don't even care because no matter who plays quarterback, he's too talented to not be great. That's how I feel about him. But what I will do is I'm going to jump over to the OSU side because I believe lost in the fold, especially as a first round pick last year, the first receiver off the board last year, with the Seattle offense and what happened last year with their offensive coordinating. Pete Carroll gone. They bring in Washington's offensive coordinator to run the offense. I always forget his name, but I don't know if you guys know it off the top of your head, but they brought in the Washington offensive coordinator who loves running 3 wide sets and loves to air the ball out. I think it's going to be one of the best offenses we've seen from Seattle in a while. And I think Jackson Smith and Jigba is going to be a stud this year. And I'm not just talking fantasy, I'm talking making impact play after impact play. He's the guy you can rely on for first downs. You can rely on him in big moments. And I think he showed glimpses of that last year, but the issue a lot of times was, one, they didn't throw the ball effectively enough. And then two, the concern was target share with DK Metcalf and with, of course, Tyler Lockett. But Lockett's getting older. That offense is going to be throwing more 3 wide, and I'm hearing such good things about JSN. I expect him to have a revelation this year. I'm not saying statistically he's going to be some 1,400-yard receiver, but I do expect him to have a major impact in the context of the plays when they need to be made. He's just so good at getting off the line and getting the ball in space, and I'm looking forward to that. So I'm going to point to him.
So, Sai, do you think he outplays DK Metcalf this year? Like, what level of success do you think Jackson achieves?
I don't think he outplays DK Metcalf. I think their roles are very different because you're looking at DK as your outside big body receiver that you can throw that jump ball to, and he's gonna uh, jump over your head and catch it or athleticism. I think Smith and Jigba is your like route runner, your great hands. Like I think he's just going to be such a great compliment, right? So I think he could very much be a 1B. I think he has that level of talent. I think he's, in my opinion, DK athletically is one of the best receivers in the league if you're just talking pure athleticism. But as a true receiver, I think Smith and Jigba gets slept on a little bit just because of the fact that he's kind of been buried a little bit in that depth chart. And I think he's capable of doing a lot as a pure like receiver who has developed the skills, right? Like I think he's a very skilled player, and I'm really looking forward to see what he does with that. And I watch his highlights, and I'm blown away. I truly believe that he's going to be an impact player. Yeah.
Man,
great pick. He was on my board as well. So no notes. The other interesting thing I saw at Hawks camp is that they're really going to start moving DK Metcalf around in the formation a lot more this year. They didn't do before, so move him into the slot, and obviously he'll play a lot outside, but just kind of keep him in motion and keep him moving. So I think that's a great point.
Well, right on that subject, Sai, I love that you picked on Seattle, but I was worried you were going to pick my player because I also am picking an offensive player on the Seattle Seahawks. I do think that team is going to take another step forward as well, and that guy is Kenneth Walker for me. I think Kenneth Walker is one of the most underrated players in the NFL right now. He was a stud at Michigan State. He's still young, has fresh legs. Pete Carroll's kind of gone. Pete Carroll, that mixed offense that would kind of start with the run, but then just it would incorporate a lot of play action. It was like a distraction. They would never run or commit to their running backs. I think this is Kenneth Walker's time to shine. He's healthy. Well, okay, aside from a small growth or growing issue that he was dealing with at camp, he'll be fine for the start of the season. But when you look at the top 2 running backs in Seattle, you've got Kenneth Walker and you've got Zach Charbonnet. And I think Zach Charbonnet is good, but I think Zach Charbonnet has speed problems. That is not a problem for Kenneth Walker. He is fast. He's tough. He can break tackles. He broke the 3rd most amount of tackles in the league last season, aside from CMC, and I don't think it was Derrick Henry, it was somebody else. But he's right up there in the breaking tackles resume. So I look at Kenneth Walker as a younger, fresher, faster Josh Jacobs, and it's impossible to not have success with a guy like that when you have Geno Smith, who is dicing up to not have 9 men in the box who are waiting for Kenneth Walker to run the football. So if Kenneth Walker gets 200 carries this year, just watch what he's going to do with them. He's north of 1,000 yards easy. I think he's going to be caught up in the pass game a little bit too. I think Zach Charbonnet will rob some touchdowns, much like Tyler Algier will rob touchdowns from Bijan. But make no mistake about it, I think Kenneth Walker is the Swiss Army knife in the NFL right now, and I want every listener to consider him in your fantasy leagues because I think he's going to do wonders. So that's my second breakout player.
I like that.
I like Ken Walker a lot too, and I've seen some of the camp buzz that he's looked, in amazing shape and all that jazz. So I'm hearing a lot of pro Seahawks, and when you pair that with a Mike McDonald head coach, one of the best defensive minds in the NFL, I'm wondering if there's going to be some love for the Seahawks from you gentlemen on next week's season preview pod, but we'll just have to tease that and see what happens. But the Charbonnet thing is interesting to me because I don't think they necessarily complement each other, those two backs. Like I almost think they're pretty similar. But he was a high draft pick as well, so it'll be interesting to see how they deploy them. But I like Kenneth Walker a lot. My next one is more of a concept almost, and it's a fundamental reshaping of the Buffalo Bills offense. If you look at what the Buffalo Bills did from an offseason standpoint, like in terms of their moves and what their team looks like now, obviously they had a lot of cap problems. So, I'm not going to talk about the defensive end of the ball, which is still, I think, going to be an issue as it was in the playoffs. But they don't have the big names, right? Stephon Diggs is gone. They didn't really replace him with any kind of like big name ad. Obviously, they drafted Keon Coleman at receiver, but I almost think they're trying to build like what the Chiefs had to do. When you have that elite quarterback that's going to soak up a lot of your cap, you have to be a little more creative with how you line up on the offensive side of the ball. So like you have almost 3 players that are almost slot type receivers. If you include Dalton Kincaid, who's almost like the slot tight end in a lot of 2 tight end sets, with Dawson Knox being the primary blocker and red zone threat. And then you bring in Curtis Samuel, who I think, although now he's injured with the little turf toe, which can linger, so that's a problem. But I think he's going to have a really good year there, moving him around in the formation a little bit in the backfield. And then Khalil Shakir, I think, is a really good breakout candidate and sleeper from a fantasy perspective. I think they're going to get him the ball a lot in space. I'm not as sold on Keon Coleman, but he mixes in well with those players as being a more true outside receiver. And I think they're going to pound James Cook, who was great last year. Ray Davis, another nice looking rookie. Like, I just think they're going to like really try and control the clock in the red zone. I think it's going to be a lot of Josh Allen's feet trying to get touchdowns and almost do what the Chiefs had to do, is just build an efficient, like kind of juggernaut that just rolls down the field, not with a bunch of quick explosive plays, but just a lot of high efficiency completions and good run game and, that type of thing. So I think it's going to be a very different look for the Bills offensively here as we move forward.
I love it. I think we're going to jump back on defense. I think we've been very, Zach started with defense, one offense for a couple. Let's go back to defense. I'm going to go with a homer pick, but I do think this homer pick is someone to keep an eye on for people that want to, make some defensive rookie of the year best. I might give you some decent odds. Leilatu Latu, my Indianapolis Colts. We got him with the 15th pick, or in the 15th pick range overall this year in the NFL draft. He was the first defensive player taken in the NFL draft, and it wasn't until the middle of the first round, which is crazy. It goes to show how much the game has changed. And the reason a lot of people are saying he fell is because Leilatu had heart issues and had health issues where people feared that he wouldn't be able to, have the motor and be able to play for a long time without being worried about long-term injury or long-term health concerns. And the reality is, he met with multiple team doctors and he was cleared. He was cleared by the Colts. He was cleared by, some of the best doctors in the world. I'm not a doctor. I can't speak to that. But all I know is when this man is on the field and he's able to play, he's an absolute menace. And he's coming into a situation where we had a very solid defensive line across the board. You got the anchors with DeForest Buckner and Glover Stewart in the middle. You had Kwity Paye and other young guys like Odigbo on the other side who are already anchoring it. And then we already had depth with Ibukam and other players coming off our bench. But Ibukam got hurt, and he's going to miss the rest of the season. So Latu immediately gets to step into that predominant pass rusher role that is what he's made for. And everyone keeps saying, not just the Colts, but analysts across the board when he was coming in kept saying this guy already had every pass rush skill, whether it's the cut, whether it's the hand movement, whether it's the spin move, whether it's the speed. He's got it all. He's built that way. And he's coming in with the help of all these guys around him. So his only role is going to be in big moments to come in and try to get after the quarterback. And with his speed and his bend, he's going to be able to do that better than most people as a rookie. And he's built and put in a situation where he's got linebackers and guys in the middle that are going to help him have that freedom where he's not going to get double teamed, because you have to double team DeForest Buckner or you're cooked. You have to put a big guy on Glover's sword. So I'm really excited to see what Latu can do. Do not be shocked if this rookie gets close to 10 sacks his rookie year on the Colts. He's not someone that people are talking about a lot, but I'm hearing a ton of camp buzz on him, and I'm really looking forward to it. So I'll leave it at that.
Love it.
Love it too. All right, sweet. Tread into our third and final one. I want to give the Falcons a shout out, right, with the Justin Simmons acquisition and AJ Terrell coming back healthy, and then Jesse Bates off of the best year of his career. But those are just roster guys who have already made an impact on previous teams. They're already doing great. It's not necessarily breakout potential or something you're seeing from camp. So I will transition from my favorite team and pick on another team in the Carolina Panthers. And I think that J.C. Horn is finally slated for a big year. Now, knock on wood, because he's an incredible talent, but he's just gotten injured in his rookie season and in the last season. But when I look at this Carolina Panthers team defensively, they've lost a lot of guys. They lost Brian Burns. We mentioned that earlier on the podcast. They lost Frankie Luvu, who's now the captain of the Washington Commanders defense. And they lost Jeremy Chin, who is a playmaker safety who just didn't fit their scheme anymore. That defense is looking for identity, and that team is really looking for identity at that point. I think it starts with J.C. Horn. J.C. Horn's now considered a veteran on that team, despite the fact he's played 5 or 6 games total in his NFL career. But I tell you what, J.C. Horn was picked in the first round for a reason. He's an incredible cornerback. He's physical. He's great man-to-man, and he's going to need to bring the personality to this Carolina Panthers team that does not know their identity left from right. And I just think that he has the talent. He's going to go up against incredible receivers and Chris Olave, Mike Evans. You've got, Drake London. You've got some studs that he's going to have to cover. And if he doesn't do his job, the Panthers are going to be atrocious this season. But if he is as good as I think he is, I think that he's going to be a top 5 corner in the league by the end of the season. I think he's that good. So I see Cy nodding his head over here. I'd love to get his take on it, but I think J.C. Horn is a guy to watch, and he's having a great training camp so far based on the buzz I'm hearing out of Spartanburg, South Carolina.
This is what I'm going to say about that real quick, Evan, let you jump in. If there's one thing NFL teams are doing correctly, it's understanding that even though we have been disappointing as a college football program in terms of our overall performance for the past decade, we produce NFL talent. And the Carolina Panthers know that very well because they took J.C. Horn last year or 2 years ago, and they also took Xavier Legette on the offensive side. And I'm telling you, both of those guys are absolute dogs. I said it about Debo years ago. These guys have what it takes. They just need to stay healthy and need to get their opportunities, and I think they both do well. So I love the pick, and as a Gamecock homer pick, I love it. Go Gamecocks. Ev, go ahead. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, not a lot of notes, but there's some positive momentum for the Panthers in general, it seems like. I like Dave Canales a lot. Bryce Young seems to be looking better this camp. I'm still not a huge believer, but no notes on the Panthers. I'll just do a quick one for my next one because I'm going to do kind of a combo in the bust category. But my quick one is just rookie quarterbacks. I think this draft class for quarterback is going to turn out to be one of the best, over the course of a couple decades. Biased on this one with Jaden Daniels. I think he's an absolute star. He looks great in camp. I do too. I think he's going to be an absolute stud if they can keep him healthy, which is a big if. Caleb Williams, from a talent perspective, is just unbelievable. I think it might actually be a little rocky this year because I'm not sold. I think Shane Waldron is their OC. From what I've seen in some of the camp footage, I'm not too impressed with this scheme offensively, but they have unbelievable weapons. And Caleb is an unbelievable talent. I love JJ McCarthy. I'm heartbroken he got hurt, but he was looking amazing in camp, and I think he's going to, be a day one starter next year and be an absolute stud. Mm-hmm. Bo Nix, sneaky day one starter potentially. Similar to that Drew Brees build with Sean Payton. I don't love what Denver has going on, but I think they might have a guy there. And Drake May looks good too. I think all of these guys look good. Drake May probably not a day one starter, but a little bit more development to be done there. But we got a lot of guys in this draft class from a quarterback perspective that are going to be pretty impressive when we look back on this in a few years. So
y'all aren't going to be able to stand me for this too. I got to give a shout out to my boy Rattler too. His camp buzz is great, man, and he
has been
very
playing
well
great.
could, especially with their quarterback situation and Derek Carr not really doing a whole lot for them. Do not be surprised if you watch him play football this year because he's always had NFL talent. But between whether it's himself or coaching, it hasn't been ideal. But Evan, I'm 100% with you. And I'm just going to add on to that because my third pick was going to be the most obvious, most, stated one. I almost did the whole quarterback class because I agree with you, Evan. I think there's so many studs in it or potential studs in it. But I got to focus specifically on the Bears and their offense. Ryan Poles is a genius. The way he has put this together, the way he traded Bryce Young, who I still believe in. I know you guys don't. I still believe he's got a chance to bounce back and be great. But putting that aside, he turned that into Caleb Williams and he turned that into Rome Odunze. And obviously Malik Neighbors and obviously Marvin Harrison Jr. are going to get their flowers as they should, but they're number ones in their offense and they're going to get all the targets and they're going to get a lot of love and hype for that, right? Rome Odunze is coming in as a rookie. A lot of people assume the number 3 wide receiver, but he's so darn good that I don't even know how Caleb Williams is going to decide who to throw the football to because you're going in with DJ Moore, who just proved last year, even with inconsistent quarterback play for his entire career, can be a legitimate number 1 receiver on any offense. He was terrific. You just added Keenan Allen, who even a year ago as an older guy was dominating the NFL as a possession receiver. You couldn't stop him when he was healthy. And then you get Odunze in there, and you pair that with Cole Kmet, who is a red zone beast. And then you add DeAndre Swift, who is a receiving running back, and he's like a perfect complement to, I think, how they're going to want to set up that offense. I don't care who your OC is. It's damn near impossible to mess that up. They have too much talent. And you take all that, and then you watch this Caleb Williams guy who obviously has had all this hype, but then with the whole being a little bit, dramatic about, what he expects for contracts and team ownership and everything coming in. I know, for example, Evan was out on him. And all of a sudden, this guy, you watch him for a couple preseason games, a little bit of camp, and Evan's not talking smack about Caleb Williams anymore. And
I'm saying the talent. Caleb, actually, I'm still not that in on the person.
All right, fair. But even what I'm saying is talent is so good that we're willing to overlook some of that, just like the Bears are. And people are going to get really tired of me doing this because every year I pick one guy and say he's going to be a future Hall of Famer. But Caleb Williams is unreal, man. This man is unreal. He's the real deal. And I don't care. I hope he grows up, and I think he will. I think he clearly is loving the role that he's in. But Caleb Williams is going to have one of the best rookie seasons I've ever seen in my life. No man has ever been set up as well as he is, and he's got so much talent. And his ability to make plays outside of the pocket with that level of talent is crazy. So book it. Caleb Williams is a future Hall of Famer. He's going to be one of the best quarterbacks we've seen in the past decade. I know a lot of people have already said that, but I'm jumping on the bandwagon. I have to. I'm sorry.
When's the last time we heard that? What's that? Zach? You remember?
I say it every
remember?
Year. I say it every
Mr. Bryce Young.
Let's see. I disagree with you in some ways. And I also think he's so unbelievably talented, but people do take it a little too far. Like that throw he made where he spun out of the pocket on the run and threw it 40 yards downfield in that game. I assume you guys saw. Everyone was saying only 2 quarterbacks in the NFL can make that throw, obviously implying Patrick Mahomes. And then everyone was replying in the comments with videos of Mike White and guys like that making the exact same throw. It's NFL quarterbacks can make that play. And then the other challenges I have, DJ Moore, we start getting into fantasy bust territory. I'm not as convinced that DJ Moore is a true number 1. I think he was buoyed by a ton of just unbelievably explosive and big plays last year. I'm not going to say I think he's going to be a bust, but I'm not as convinced. I do love Rome. Rome is a stud. Keenan Allen looks washed in camp. Obviously, I assume he's just not trying, and he might be doing the James Harden thing where he wore 4 layers of clothes, making him look really fat. I assume it's one of those things, but Keenan looks washed. And then Shane Waldron, I saw a stat the other day. Again, preseason, not regular season. But he used the lowest percentage of 11 formations, i.e. he's using a ton of 2 tight end with Gerald Everett as opposed to just letting Moore, Odunze, and Allen all play on the field at the same time. And if that carries over into the regular season, then I'm going to be very confused because I agree Cole Kmet is an absolute stud and is slept on. And I'm not that in on DeAndre Swift anymore. So I'm not as in on the rest of the pieces around him. So I actually think, especially with the OC, like it might be a little sloppy at times from Caleb, but we'll see.
I think saying DJ Moore, and I think Zach agrees with me here, given both of our reactions to this. I think saying DJ Moore isn't a true number one is
It's a bold take.
It's absolute blasphemy. This man has somehow had multiple over 1,000-yard seasons, and he's played with the likes of Sam Darnold, a washed Cam Newton. Then last year he had Justin Fields for half a year, and then a bunch of random backups. And even last year, with half a season of Justin Fields and all the injuries, he had 1,400 yards receiving with not good offensive coordinating and everything else. The way he runs routes and the way he just burns corners and gets opens, and his hands. I mean, I don't know how we can't give DJ Moore more credit. The fact of the matter is there's a lot of great receivers in the NFL who, if you put them in his shoes, probably wouldn't perform as well. I think that's a testament to how amazing DJ Moore is. Personally, that's my. I don't think he's going to be a fantasy bust at all.
Yeah, I'm not as all the way on bust, but I'm not also convinced that he's like a true fantasy wide receiver one. I guess is my point. He did, obviously last year he was, but with no other receivers great, he was playing with Fields, as I mentioned, so there's a little both ends of this, but we'll see what it looks like when he has a true offense with a lot of weapons. We'll see.
I agree with you that he isn't a fantasy number one wide receiver, but he's not being drafted as a fantasy number one wide receiver. He's being drafted in the middle of the fourth round. And the upside you can get out of taking a guy like DJ Moore, who is the number one on his offense coming into the year, in a good offense with a potentially great quarterback in the fourth round compared to some of the other guys that are going around him, I would actually say he's the value. And now if he was going in the second round or third round, as he might have in other situations, I would agree with you. Like if he was early third, late second, I'm with you. I think that's a reach because his floor might not be as high, but his ceiling is high enough to be a top 12 receiver. And that's why I like him in the fourth round. That's why I don't think where he's going is a bad thing. That's my opinion, though.
What else we got? I guess we're on to bus and just kind of honorable mentions because we've had 35.
Yeah, but to say, because I know we want to save some time for the fantasy segment, but I've got a sleeper guy for you guys. I actually don't like this person. I never have, but I think he actually is going to be pretty good. And I think he's going to be a leader very quickly on his team, and that's Will Levis. I think Will Levis is going to actually have a rock star season. I think he's going to have a rock star season. I'm saying it here. I think he's going to be a top 15. Now I got to go more than that. Top 12 quarterback in the league this year. They got a couple of new guys that came in, right? Calvin Ridley came in. New leadership. They're kind of trying to find their identity again. But I think the Tennessee Titans under Will Levis will be explosive in the sense of lots of production. I think he's going to be a 4,000-yard passer. I think he's going to be 25-plus touchdowns, but I think he's going to come along with 17, 18 interceptions. So I think he's going to have an explosive year, both good and bad, but it's going to be meaningful and it's going to be identifiable to the Tennessee Titans. It's going to give them that sense of identity, and they're going to move forward with him. So that's my sleeper pick right there, Will Levis.
Zach, where do you think Will Levis finishes in his own division in terms of quarterback rankings, like in the four that are in the division?
That's a great question. I think that's a great question, man, because I think Trevor Lawrence is going to have a bounce back year too. I'm going to say Will Levis is going to finish third out of the four.
Does that mean you're putting AR fourth?
Yeah.
I'm going to remember that one. I'm going to remember that one for the end.
And here's my bust. I don't think AR-15 is as good as people think he is. I think he's nearing a bust at this point. I don't think he's healthy enough to stay on the field.
We're jumping right into the bust section, so this is good. No, please dig deeper. I want to hear more about this.
I think AR-15 is like a Cam Newton. I think he's got a great deep ball, but Cam had a great deep ball, but he's gonna have accuracy issues where his comp percentage low to mid range is below 60%, which becomes a big problem for an offense that needs that spark with a Pittman and a Jonathan Taylor. If you can't throw the ball consistently, you're going to start to stack 8, 9 in the box, ready for those read options so that AR-15 can run, which your team and your administration has already told you guys are not going to run him as much. So if he's a pocket passer now, that's a huge problem because he can't throw 60% completion rate. That's my issue with AR-15. He's a freakish talent. I understand that. But I think that if he can't get it going in the pass game, then Jonathan Taylor is going to struggle in the run game, and then the team's going to struggle as a result of that. So not big on AR-15, but I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts.
So I wasn't going to pick him as a sleeper because obviously he's my own quarterback, but I'll let Evan comment and then I'll jump in after because obviously I have my rebuttal.
I agree with Zach in a lot of ways. I'm concerned about the passing. I'm concerned about the accuracy big time. But like with Steichen being there, like I agree with the Cam Newton comp, but Cam Newton also, you caught lightning in the bottle with that, and like, you know, obviously we're not calling Cam Newton's career a bust. So I think you can kind of, from a scheme standpoint with Steichen, like you can, you know, get a ton out of him, but you're gonna have to rely on his legs for sure. Because I think that the accuracy does not look good at all. So I agree with you a lot in a lot of ways there, but I think you can almost work around that when you have such a brilliant offensive mind. So I'm a little 50-50 on this one in terms of how it's all going to turn out. But yeah, I'm definitely have those same concerns as Zach.
I don't blame either of you because obviously he's an extremely raw prospect coming out of the draft, and he obviously only played 4 games, and one of those he got hurt and then missed the rest of the season. The difference, though, is people expected Anthony Richardson, myself included. I thought when he got drafted, he was going to be sitting on the bench for half a year at least before he came in and played, before he started the game. And I would probably be more inclined to agree with you if he didn't have one of the best offensive minds and one of the best young head coaches in the NFL in, of course, Shane Steichen. And what did Shane Steichen do with Jalen Hurts? What did Shane Steichen do with Justin Herbert? He made them great. The years he was with those guys is when those guys had, one had almost an MVP year, and the other one had 5,000 yards passing and 40 touchdowns. And what have they been without him? My big thing is the combination of Steichen and Richardson is what makes Richardson, you know, the ceiling so darn high, even though I do agree that his floor isn't as high as your traditional pocket passers that are out there. I won't dispute that at all. But his ceiling is through the roof because you have so much baseline talent with the arm strength, with the ability to scramble, with the ability to put the ball in pockets, with the ability to out strength and outrun people. I mean, this guy ran, you know, this guy is faster than Cam by like a solid, like, I don't know, like 0.1, 0.2 on a 40. He's insanely fast. So you add that in. But I think the part that you guys are missing, or I don't know about Evan, but that Zach is missing, is Shane Steichen came out and said definitively, I think, what did he say? He said, taking away Anthony Richardson running is like taking a 3-point shot away from Steph Curry. We're not doing it, period. We are running Anthony Richardson. That is what he does better than everyone, or is what he said. And so we will run Anthony Richardson. But I won't blame you guys if you're concerned about accuracy. What I will say, though, is even in a short sample last year, he was showing his ability to make big plays and throw the ball down the field, and we were competing against good teams. As a matter of fact, we dismantled C.J. Stroud and the Houston Texans when those guys played early in their career. And back then, before Richardson got hurt, people were saying Richardson looks better than Stroud. And then Richardson gets hurt, and then Stroud takes off after that. And, of course, we're not talking about that anymore. So, let you know, I like it because I like that you guys aren't big on him right now because I hope you're wrong and I get to see it, but I don't blame you for the accuracy concerns. I know that's a concern. Last thing I'll say is he is actually more comped from scouts and everything else to Josh Allen than he is to Cam Newton because Josh Allen and Anthony Richardson are the same size. Anthony Richardson's actually stronger and Anthony Richardson's faster. And you want to know what Josh Allen's biggest issue was coming out of college and his rookie year in the NFL where he actually wasn't that great? It was accuracy. He was missing people left and right and throwing a bunch of interceptions. And now we're talking about Josh Allen as a perennial top 2 quarterback in the NFL. So just that's all I got to say, and I'll leave it at that.
That's an interesting rebuttal, Cy, and I will rebuttal you once more. You brought up basketball with the Curry, so let me switch it and translate it back to basketball. You're essentially saying Josh Allen had accuracy issues, and so you're acknowledging that AR-15 has those accuracy issues, but they will be fixed, right? I heard the same thing with Ben Simmons. He was the worst shooter known to mankind, never got it done, never figured it out. Now he just sits on the bench and collects a paycheck. Let's hope AR-15 is not Ben Simmons of football.
I agree. Although Ben Simmons was an all-star before he started getting the yips and then decided that he did some things very well before he decided that he wasn't going to play basketball anymore. So I'll leave it at that. Yeah.
Well, that's kind of maybe the model. You catch lightning in a bottle here quick, and you better capitalize on it. Because the biggest question about him isn't even his accuracy; it's his ability to stay healthy, obviously. So, and if you're running him that much, obviously that's a big issue. But so I guess are we doing bus? I guess we're just kind of spitballing, which is why this episode is great. But is it me or is it Zach?
I think we
should it's you now.
It's me.
I think we should do bust in terms of fantasy football. So Zach's and Anthony Richardson. Anthony Richardson's going in the 5th round, so that's fair because he's being drafted almost as if he's an elite quarterback in fantasy. So I could see why Zach picked him as a bust. Evan, who do you have as a bust in fantasy football?
So I appreciate that attempt to steer the conversation. I'm going to keep mine conceptual, but I will mention a few busts as part of this conceptual bring up. And it's similar to what I mentioned about the Bills, but kind of the other way. It's people understanding the new Chargers offense with John Harbaugh and Greg Roman. Obviously in the past with Justin Herbert, the Chargers wanted to throw the ball a ton. That is not going to be the case with these two new guys. They're going to try and pound the rock, high efficiency play action, use the running backs, build a good offensive line. And for this reason, one of my sleepers that I'm building into this both is J.K. Dobbins, a bounce back off the Achilles. One of the best backs in the league from an efficiency standpoint when he's healthy. Obviously, health is a big if, but shout out Dr. Neil Elatrach, who did Aaron Rodgers' Achilles surgery. He also did J.K. Dobbins'. In camp, Dobbins apparently looks amazing. He feels amazing. He's looks ready to go. So I think he could have a huge year if you're kind of run that hero or zero RB strategy. And then from a bus, Herbert's going like late QB2 range, so you can't really call him a bust. But I see absolutely zero chance that Justin Herbert is a fantasy QB1 this year with how much they're going to run the ball with Greg Roman and the lack of receivers. And I think on that offense is only going to produce, I'll set the over-under at 1.5 usable fantasy players. And I think it'll be, again, I mentioned Dobbins, so I think Dobbins, but even maybe if Dobbins gets hurt again, maybe it's Gus Edwards or even Vital, the rookie. And then maybe Ladd McConkey as a high possession receiver, especially in PPR formats. Otherwise, I think the Chargers are going to be a horrible team and an absolute dead zone for fantasy football, partially because of Greg Roman. But the other shout out I'll make is that they built an actually pretty good run blocking offensive line. So I think their run game's actually going to be pretty good. But so that's a combo of a sleeper, a bust, and a concept for you. Deontay Johnson. It's kind of an obvious one back to the camp buzz, but he's still only 28. Like, he got into a bad situation, I think, in Pittsburgh to an extent, and Dave Canales basically came out and said that our offense is going to feature a number one wide receiver, and they have a lot of good young guys in that room, like Xavier Legette that I mentioned earlier. But for now, it's Deontay Johnson. So,
I agree. That's a good pick. What you got, Zach?
I don't know if I have any bounce backs like at the top of my head, but I got two quick busts for you. I've got Saquon Barkley as a bust. I think that DeAndre Swift is quicker than him, and I think that's required in a Philadelphia offense, just the way they run things. I think there's too many mouths to feed. There's A.J. Brown, if he doesn't get the ball constantly, he's going to be upset. Devonta Smith's going to take a step forward. And just because Jason Kelce retired doesn't mean they're going to stop running the Philly special. Or not the Philly special. What is it called? The tush push, thank you. But like Jalen Hurts is going to steal touchdowns from Saquon Barkley. So I think Saquon's going to have, he's going to have a better year than he had in New York, but I don't think he's like this second coming guy who's going to be a stud. And he's drafted right now in like the top 7-8 picks right now in mock drafts. And I just think that is a ridiculous claim. So I'm going to be passing on Saquon in those first 8 to 10 picks. And then the only other bust I have, just more conceptual, is Baker Mayfield. I think that with him losing his head coach, I just think that he had a good season last year, and people want the Baker buzz to be back because they remember him from college, and that personality is kind of resurrected in the sense of like he's talking smack again, he's throwing the ball left and right. But I just think Baker's going to deviate back to what he's typically been, and I'm just not very high on him or the Buccaneers. Actually, best bet is Buccaneers under 7.5 wins this year. I think that's a stamp. So those are my two busts.
I don't like them.
I am inclined to agree with your Baker take, but you know how much of a Saquon truther I am. And first of all, his ADP is actually, at least from where I've drafted it's generally actually early second round. So I agree with you. If he was to get taken as a top 8 player, then I think that's crazy because there's, in my mind, certainly 8 better fantasy players to pick. But as the early second round pick, especially going after guys like Jonathan Taylor and Kyron Williams, prior to guys like, I don't know, Derrick Henry and Devon Achains of the world, I think that's a great place to get Saquon. But the biggest qualm I have with it is Saquon has managed to somehow be relevant and be one of the best running backs in the NFL on a terribly managed, terribly run team that for a long time did not have a good offensive line and didn't give him any receiving weapons around him and had a, at best, mid quarterback at his best, and more often than not, a bad quarterback. And somehow Saquon has managed to have fantasy relevance in that context. And not just be relevant, but be a running back one on multiple years. To the point where his rookie year, we're talking about a guy that had 1,800 yards, all-purpose yards, and double-digit touchdowns. So although I agree with you guys, maybe the tush push takes away some touchdown potential, but he wasn't scoring touchdowns anyway the last 2 years, and he was still fantasy relevant. The Eagles' offense opens up so many lanes for him. You have to worry about Jalen Hurts for all the points you just made. You have to worry about Jalen Hurts. You have to worry about A.J. Brown. You have to worry about Devontae Smith. That paired with how much money they're paying Saquon Barkley, you think they're paying Saquon Barkley $17 million a year to bring him to Philly and just have him stand in the backfield and block? Are you kidding me? Saquon is going to be an absolute stud in Philly, and he's going to have the most running lanes. And you were worried about speed? Don't forget, his yards after contact and his ability to make plays in the open field is the reason he was able to be successful on the Giants when he had no blocking and no other weapons around him. Saquon is going to be a stud, man. I don't know what this guy has to do for people to start giving an elite talent like him credit. I mean,
he has to have a good fantasy season.
He did.
Long time ago.
You referenced his rookie year. You referenced his rookie year. That was like a decade ago.
No, I also referenced his last 2 years before he got hurt. I think that's completely unfair. Like, who's going to find success in that kind of offensive scheme? Not as much as he did. I mean, clearly his talent is the reason he was able to even be relevant.
Dude, Saquon didn't do anything last year. Let me check.
Go look at how many games he
Let
played.
me check. While Zach fact checks himself,
he didn't even have 1,000 yards last year. He had 250. He had 250 attempts,
Zach,
and he had 900 yards.
And who was his quarterback?
Well,
and who was his receivers?
Tommy DeVito.
Okay. Guess what Saquon Barkley's yards per carry was? It was 3.9.
Yeah, exactly, Zach. Can you name their quarterback? Can you name anything relevant on their offense that would have helped Saquon Barkley be better than a 3.9 per carry?
The gabagool of Tommy DeVito himself, all right? The Italiano. And guess what? Saquon Barkley didn't even average 4 yards a carry last year. This is heavily problematic.
How old is Saquon?
He's
like almost 29.
He's 26.
He's 27.
It's 27. Sure, he just turned 27. Whatever it is. For a guy who's so about scheming, in terms of like offensive schematically and coaching and everything else, Zach, with the way you break things down, for you to blatantly sleep on the fact that Saquon has been in a terrible position for his entire career and has somehow managed to be relevant is the part that's getting me. But that's okay, because I can't wait to quote this and put it back out there when he dominates in football this year, and I can't wait.
3.9 yards a carry last year, Si.
Let's focus on 1 year. That's a good idea. That's smart.
Less than 1,000 yards and 250 attempts. That's not good.
I'm sorry, how many games did he play?
I don't know, but he had 250 attempts and he didn't get 1,000 yards.
It's still relevant when you're not playing with a good team and you don't play as many games. That's all I gotta say.
So if I can break the ice on the nuances, my issue with Si's take is he's hurt like this every year, though, and you just assume that he's like all of a sudden not going to get hurt, especially as he's getting to an age which is really pushing over the hill for running backs. He's maybe got a year or two left at most. Once you hit that 28 number as a running back, you're typically in trouble. I actually had Barkley as a bust on my list based on where he was going. But the interesting thing, I actually disagree with you guys, is the tush push situation, because without Jason Kelce, I'm not sure they're going to be able to do it in the same way, which opens up touchdown opportunities for Barkley.
They got Cam Jurgens. He's a stud too.
Cam Jurgens is a stud.
Sure, but we'll see. I'm not as positive they're going to be able to do it like they did it last year. But Zach, I mean, you comparing the comparison of Swift being better in some ways than Barkley is not one. I cannot get behind that one in any way, shape, or form.
Swift is good.
Swift isn't very good.
Comical that you're like relegating Saquon Barkley and the beautiful man that he is and comparing him to DeAndre Swift. If Saquon Barkley has been on a good offense his whole NFL career, we would be talking about him as a top 5 running back without even hesitation, because he does everything well. And the other thing I will also say, Evan, is I agree that he's been more hurt recently. But when the entire defensive scheme is to load up the box and you're going to take a major hits over and over and over again because there's no one else the offense can rely on, then I would assume you'd get hurt more. Think about what Christian McCaffrey did when he left the Panthers and went to the San Francisco 49ers, and he didn't have to take on as much of the offensive load, and he had weapons around him. He was able to open up. I'm not saying Saquon's Christian, but he's closer to Christian McCaffrey than he is to DeAndre Swift. I'll tell you that much. And I'll leave it at that.
The other thing is more so like the offense in general. It's going to be really efficient for the most part if they can fix the offensive line losses they made. But it's never one that's like really truly had like a number one feature back. Like you talk about getting AJ Brown the ball, Devontae Smith's going to get the ball a lot, and Jalen Hurts is going to use his legs. So I think that maybe that's my biggest issue is like I think he's going to be efficient. I think he's going to be good, but he's maybe more of an RB2 from a fantasy standpoint for me, which could put him into bust territory based on where he's getting drafted. But maybe some honorable mentions. We are almost at an hour, which I love. Good conversation, but some of these might spark too much debate. But I think Chris Olave might be doomed from horrible quarterback play, and he's getting drafted pretty high. I love Chris Olave, but he might have the Terry McLaurin issue of like he's never going to have a good quarterback, which is going to really hurt him. George Pickens, again, horrendous offense. Could project there. I don't think they're going to get Ayuk, but especially if they get Ayuk and like the quarterbacks in camp, just horrible. And we know Arthur Smith has his issues. So, and I like Pickens, but those are maybe some of the honorable mentions I had. And then I'm fascinated by Kyle Pitts. One quote I wanted to bring up.
Bring him my way. Let's go.
I'm not saying he's going to be a bust, but one quote I wanted to bring up by Kirk Cousins that makes it so interesting is that we always, especially as like more casuals, like I wouldn't call us like casuals necessarily, but we are casuals. Like we always like talk about how talented some of these guys are, but there's a difference between being talented from a combine 40-yard dash size standpoint and being an in-game, someone that can use those talents in-game. And what Kirk Cousins said about Kyle Pitts is he's always been getting on him about, actually catching the ball out in front from his body and high pointing it. And I don't care if you're 6'7" and can jump through the roof. Like if you're catching it with your body, that doesn't matter. You're the same size as anyone else. So that would lead me as to why Kyle Pitts has been a bust so far. Obviously, not talking about the scheme is a mess, all that kind of stuff. And then the second one is that Kirk says he doesn't run full speed all the time. So basically, we always talk about he has the speed of the wide receiver and a size of a massive tight end, but apparently he catches the ball with his body and doesn't run full speed. So that makes sense as to why he's been a bust so far. So now, of all people that can teach him to do that from a quarterback standpoint, Kirk is a great guy. So I'm not saying he's not going to be good, but I think that was a really interesting quote and gives us some insight as to, in addition to the horrible offensive scheme, as to why Kyle Pitts has been horrible.
This is
take this.
This is just getting ridiculous. First of all, let's take it a couple years back. I'm not blaming you, Evan. I get where you're coming from, but
Kirk
I'm talking
said
about the overall perspective of Kyle Pitts' career so far. This man didn't drop a single football in his entire college career, first of all. So we're talking about his ability to catch a football. He did not drop a single one. But then he comes in his rookie year, and he has an aging Matt Ryan, which is the only year Kyle Pitts played with a legitimate NFL caliber starting quarterback. Because since then, he's had Desmond Ridder and Heineken, man, that you guys love so much, and all these other trash quarterbacks. No offense to them, but they aren't good. And the 1 year he had an old Matt Ryan, people are calling that a bust. He had 1,000 yards receiving as a rookie tight end. What do we want from people? 1,000 yards receiving as a rookie tight end. Rob Gronkowski and Travis Kelce didn't do that as rookies. And Kyle Pitts did that at the age of 21. I mean, it's actually ridiculous that the last 2 years where he's had terrible offenses around him, might I add, I talked about those terrible quarterbacks, and then you add in Mr. Arthur Smith, who for some reason has a job with the Steelers, and we're giving Kyle Pitts crap. Are you kidding me? Kyle Pitts? Oh, I'm just. It is what it is. Kirk, you're gonna love Kyle Pitts by the end of the season. That's all I'll say. That's crazy to me.
I'm just pointing out that all we know about is the talent, how big guys are, and that kind of stuff. But we can't see on film that like catching with your body and not running full speed. Those are pretty. And Pickens is a similar kind of guy in that way. Like if you watch the film, the dude takes routes off like crazy. I have a feeling Kirk is going to be able to fix it. But I thought that quote was really interesting and just kind of gave us insight. And I mean, people including you, Sai, said he was going to be a future Hall of Famer, one of the greatest tight ends in NFL history, and he's got some work to do. So
he definitely does. I won't dispute that. I certainly labeled him very ahead of it, but I don't think that his career thus far has been a bust if you look at the whole career, because for some reason people forget his first year when he actually had a real quarterback. Because if you look at that year coming out after Matt Ryan, everybody was stoked about Kyle Pitts. He had 1,000 yards receiving as a rookie at a tight end. That's unheard of. Like I mean, even Laporta last year, who had like 13 touchdowns, didn't get to 1,000 yards receiving. Like people really forget how good Kyle Pitts was as a rookie, and he hasn't had anyone to throw him the football since then. I mean, I think him and Drake London and Bijan Robinson, I think all these guys are going to shoot up the board. I know Zach's not a big Drake London guy. I know we have to wrap up in a second, but I never threw my bounce back guys, so I'll throw them in super quickly, assuming we don't have any other things. Evan and I kind of debated these guys over text, but for where they're going in drafts, given what they've done in the past and given, hopefully a more healthy situation for them this year and a better offensive situation for them this year, I believe Jalen Waddle in the 3rd to 4th round, who 2 years ago was the wide receiver 7 or wide receiver 8 in fantasy football, a top 10 receiver. I understand Tyreek Hill's there, but Tyreek Hill was there when he did it 2 years ago. He had 1,400 yards receiving and double-digit touchdowns. I think he very well could do that again in a Miami offense that loves to air it out. He doesn't need nearly as many attempts, and he's a guy who's capable of over 100 receptions with Hill there. He's done it before. I think he can do it again if he stays healthy. And then the other guy I'll throw out is Calvin Ridley is going in like the 10th-ish round of fantasy football drafts right now. And as Zach alluded to, if that offense is marginally better, if Will Levis is marginally better, I think Ridley is by far and away going to be the number one. DeAndre Hopkins is older now. He's not capable of taking on the load that he used to, and he's hurt at the moment. And Will Levis is going to throw the ball to Ridley more. I truly believe the reason Ridley didn't break out more last year with the Jaguars wasn't his inability or his lack of talent. I think it's because the Jaguars did not know how to get him the football the way he deserved to down the field. I think Trevor Lawrence did not have the greatest season throwing the football down the field, and I think he's going to be better on that team. And last but certainly not least, if Brandon Ayuk gets traded, jump all aboard the Debo and the George Kittle train, because those guys, when Brandon Ayuk isn't on the field, are like leaps and bounds better, and they're already good. So I'll leave it at
that. So much to say, but so little time.
I know. We gotta wrap this one up, fellas. We gotta wrap this one up over here so I can edit this thing under an hour. But the only thing I'll say is Kirk is a narc, because how dare you publicly state that a player on your own team is not running at full speed? Kirk, these are in-house discussions you need to be having in the Atlanta Falcons cap. You narc. Don't ever say that about your players. Come on, man. Gosh. That's all I got to say.
I didn't even get to reignite my Brock Purdy isn't good take, but I'll save it for another episode.
You're just saying that because Josh Jobs
he looks awful in camp. If Trent Williams isn't there and he doesn't have the Avengers to back him up, he's nothing. But this is not an hour 10 in discussion to have. So
we will. Here's what we're gonna do. Here's what we're gonna do, guys. Here's what we're gonna do to put a bow on it. In terms of fantasy football specifically, we talked about this a little bit. We will do a full-scale MDS, like quick sleeper mock draft episode for fantasy football in the coming weeks before the season starts, especially with a lot of people having their redraft leagues. And that'll be a great time for us to debate a lot of individual players, whether it's in real life or in fantasy, because then we'll be able to argue at picks why people are overrated, underrated. I think that'll be a great way to do it rather than continue to debate, because we could go for hours, as you all know. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, that would be great. I don't know when we're going to have time, though, Si. We got to figure it out, but that would be a great app. I hope.
I'll figure it out. Or anyway. If not, I'll run it on my own, and you guys can critique it after, whatever it takes.
Love it.
We can do that.
Right. Let's just close. Otherwise, we'll keep talking. It's been a while, boys. So great stuff. Yeah. Great episode. Hope y'all enjoyed it. As always, check out the trailer we made earlier for where you can find us. Like and subscribe. Same old places: YouTube, Spotify this year, Instagram. We'd love to hear your opinions. But yeah, thanks as always for the support. That was Mondays Down South, episode 1 of season 4 for the 2024 NFL season, presented by Seams Media. Yeah.
Don't do drugs, kids.